7:34 on LBC. We are streaming now until 9 o'clock. If you want to watch us on video, you can do so on the LBC YouTube channel, Twitter feed, Facebook, or on Global Player. Now, we're going to be interviewing all of the leaders of the Scottish and Welsh political parties in advance of the elections on May the 6th. And first up tonight is Alex Salmond, who you will know as former Scottish First Minister, former leader of the SNP, but now leader of the new Alba party. Alex, welcome. How is Alba different from the SNP? Because obviously you both want independence, but how can you really differentiate yourself?
It's Alba. No, I don't blame
it's
you.
What?
Iain. Alba. It's pronounced Alba. It's Gaelic for Scotland. It's Scots Gaelic.
Sounds like a flower.
Scotland. Well, in some ways it is actually a flower as well, but it was actually, Scotland was called the Kingdom of Alba for 350 years. I mean, I know your medieval history is really good. So Alba means Scotland, and of course it brings you up to the top of the ballot paper, which is another great advantage of it. What's the difference in the SNP? Well, both parties who believe in independence. I would say it's a sense of urgency would be the biggest difference. The SNP are saying that they're going to have a referendum in 2023 or sometime like that. We say the first week back in a month's time, the Scottish Parliament should pass a resolution instructing the Scottish Government, to begin negotiations on independence with the Westminster Government. So a different criteria in terms of timescale and a different sense of urgency.
But you can hardly accuse the SNP and Nicola Sturgeon of dilly-dallying. I mean, there's a COVID pandemic at the moment. She has committed to a referendum at the end of this year or next year. You can't go much quicker than that.
Well, the latest indication is somewhat later, in 2023 or perhaps even later. I don't accuse Nicola Sturgeon of anything. Let's get this right. I'm just interested in putting forward the Alba point of view. But I would say, it's 7 years since the last referendum. There is now
that once-in-a-generation referendum.
Well, I mean, the Cabinet Office, of course, defined a 7-year period for Northern Irish border polls. That was the Cabinet Office initiative. It said you could have a constitutional referendum in Northern Ireland every 7 years. It was in the St Andrews Agreement. Well, luckily for us, it's 7 years since the Scottish referendum. But if the Scottish people determine that they wish to see progress on the constitutional question, progress on independence, then I think that's exactly what the Scottish Parliament should do. And I don't think anybody, Nicola Sturgeon or anybody else, should dilly-dally on it. I think we should get ahead with it, get it done, a real sense of urgency. I mean, when I was First Minister, I embarked with David Cameron on the Edinburgh Agreement in 2012. At that time, independence was at 30% in the opinion polls. After a referendum campaign, it got to 45%. Now independence is, let's say it's 50%. Let's say it's 50-50. I don't see any reason why anybody supporting independence wouldn't want to get ahead with that sense of urgency. And I know that many folk in Scotland want to see that sense of urgency.
If Boris Johnson maintains his position, though, saying, well, sorry, it was a once-in-a-generation referendum, there's not going to be another one, regardless of the result on May the 6th, are you saying that effectively Scotland declares UDI?
Well, regardless of the results, quite interesting, isn't it? David Cameron used to say something like that until his mind was changed by the 2011 election in Scotland. Now, the key aspect in this election that we've introduced in the Alba Party is to argue for the significance of what we call a supermajority. In other words, instead of having a 50-50 situation in the Scottish Parliament, as I did, to be fair, back in 2011, but to have perhaps 80, perhaps 90 MSPs in the Scots Parliament supporting independence and only perhaps 40 supporting the union, a majority for independence potentially of 50 MSPs. Now that would be a fundamentally different position, because instead of Boris Johnson saying, look, this is me, the Tory Prime Minister, against the First Minister, Tories against SNP, it'd be Boris Johnson as a Tory Prime Minister taking on not a single party, but a parliament representing an entire nation.
Well,
I think that changes the balance.
That's true if you do well, but as you well know, the polls so far haven't really given you much support. I mean, a couple of them have got zero. I mean, you'd get 0 seats. There's one out today, which I know you're going to turn me towards. I think it was commissioned by an organisation called Better in Scotland, which is an organisation obviously in favour of independence.
No, it's a polling organisation. Come on, be fair.
Well, no, panel based is the polling organisation.
Yes, I know, but they commissioned it.
Better in Scotland. Yes, I know, but when you know as well as I do, when you commission polls, you want a particular result.
Oh, wait a minute. Not when you ask for party ratings, Iain. You can only say who you're voting for.
But I mean, this poll says that you maybe get 5 or 6 seats. Now, that's not exactly a breakthrough, and it could be 5 or 6 seats that might have gone to the SNP.
Well, excuse me, it is a breakthrough if you're starting from nothing, Iain. I mean, that's
not breaking the mould of Scottish politics, is it?
Well, I disagree, actually. This party, Alba, started 3 weeks ago. That was the public launch, almost 3 weeks this Friday. And that poll shows us drawing level with the Liberal Democrats, an organisation which...
Is that the summit of your aspiration?
No, it's not. But it's interesting. I mean, the Liberal Democrats have been in business in various disguises for 150 years.
But the Greens will still be ahead of you, and they are in favour of independence. Don't you risk taking votes off them?
Well, I'll come into that in a second. The Greens have been in business for about 50 years. I'm merely saying to draw level with one of the, quote, major parties after 3 weeks, overtake them in membership after 3 weeks, as we've done with 5,000 members, is pretty good. Incidentally, we've got twice as many MPs in the Westminster Parliament as the Scottish Labour Party have. Now, admittedly, that's 2 against their 1, but it's still a fact. So that sort of achievement after a mere 3 weeks, I think, puts scores on the board. Is it the limit of our ambition? No, it's not. I think we can do much better than that. But even that, Iain, would result in a supermajority, in my calculation, of 80 seats for independence and only 50 seats for the Union, an independence majority of almost 30. Now, that's significant.
What about your own personal ratings? Because according to a recent poll, only 14% of people in Scotland have a favourable view of you, 74% have an unfavourable view, 58% have a favourable view of Nicola Sturgeon. Why do you think that is, that people have such an unfavourable view of you?
I don't think look, for the last few years I've been able to talk about nothing except a series of court cases, trials, investigations. That's all I've been able to say. I've been talking about politics for 3 years, well, 2.5 years anyway. The next 3 weeks I'm going to talk about politics, and you'll see these ratings change, as you'll see the ratings for the Alba party increase. And incidentally, if we're already registering with scores on the board after 3 weeks, the next 3 weeks is going to be very interesting in Scottish politics.
Well, I seem to remember when the SDP formed in 1981, they were at 50% in the polls within about a week. Sort of 2 or 3% isn't really cutting it, is it?
Well, they went up like a rocket and down like the stick. We're on a rising trajectory. Timing our effort for election day. I'll tell you what I think is more significant, Iain. I think to get to 5,000 members after 3 weeks, overtaking the Liberal Democrats, closing in on the Scottish Conservatives, who've only got 6,000 members, we should overtake them by the end of the campaign. And then, of course, they are a fundamentally significant political party. So, look, the Alba Party is new, it's different, we've got name recognition to get across. Can I guarantee we're going to be successful? Of course I can. Do I think we're going to be successful? Yes, I do. Let's take a look at it this way. We've got brave hearts and high hopes.
Well, we'll come on to Braveheart in just a minute. On the day after you announced, Nicola Sturgeon said this. She said... whatsoever in saying this, but I think there are significant questions about the appropriateness of his return to public office, given the concerns that have been raised about his behaviour previously, but that's for voters to judge and decide. What significant questions do you think she was referring to?
Well, I have no idea, but the most significant point about that is it's for voters to judge and decide. So let's let the voters judge and decide.
She went on, she said, I know Alex Salmond very well. He makes big claims which often don't stand up to scrutiny. She said it was all about, and this is in quotes, self-interest and, dare I say it, ego. Alex Salmond is a gambler. It's what he enjoys doing, but this is not the time to gamble with the future of the country. She's right, isn't she? This is just a giant ego trip. You missed the limelight.
No, I didn't form the Alba Party. It was formed by Laurie Flynn, the former World in Action.
Come on.
It was formed by Laurie Flynn, the former World in Action journalist. A number of parties saw the opportunity for an independent supporting list party. They all approached me. There's about 5 of them. But I thought Laurie had the best proposition, him and his committee, and I think that's right. As for Nicola, look, I've decided in this entire campaign, I'm not going to say an adverse word about Nicola Sturgeon. I'm just going to promote the Alba Party and say why a sense of urgency into the independence debate is very much required. And I'd say generally about the SNP. I mean, if the SNP thought they had nothing to worry about in terms of the Alba Party making ground and making gains, then they wouldn't have such a frenetic reaction to our emergence in Scottish politics.
Now, when we used to do our weekly phone-ins on LBC, halcyon days...
I wasn't sure you're allowed to mention that. Are you allowed to mention
absolutely, I'm completely allowed to mention that. We used to have some quite rumbustious discussions on independence.
Yeah, I was against Donald Trump. You were in favour of it.
I certainly was not.
I'm only kidding.
As you well know. I always remember you couldn't pronounce the word Trump.
No, that was deliberate. It was a kind of joke I had.
You always denied that the SNP was anti-English, and you were very convincing on that. Yet you have just put out an election broadcast whose main aim is to encourage anti-English sentiment. Now, I think this is fairly desperate stuff. Well, let's just have a listen.
Oh, good.
In the year of our Lord 1314, facing yet another defeat, King Robert ordered the camp followers to Gillies Hill, where they raised their home-knit banners and surged forth as a fresh Scottish army. And this demonstration of people powered by the small folk of Scotland was the straw which broke the spine of English superiority, and their prime commander Edward Plantagenet fled south. I know. I was there. I am the Bruce, and here and now, people power will prevail again. Alba will unite the clan.
So are you Robert the Bruce, Braveheart, or just another politician desperate for attention, trying to mine the seam of what you think is anti-English sentiment?
You missed the point entirely. This was a voiceover by Angus McFadden, who played Robert the Bruce in Braveheart, who also reprised the role in a film last year. And as Angus himself said, much of the script was tongue-in-cheek. But the serious point in the script was nothing about the English. The serious point
which broke the spine of English superiority.
No, okay, that's what happened at Bannockburn. That is the serious point. It's a historical aspect from Barber's Bruce of 1375, if you want the actual reference, that a turning point in the Battle of Bannockburn was the emergence of the small folk, the camp followers on a hill, who were ordered by Bruce because, things were in the balance. They were mistaken for a new, fresh Scottish army. That's what broke the spine of English resistance.
You have to go back to the 1300s.
No. The point that Angus makes in the film, slightly tongue-in-cheek, as he said himself, was comparing that with the small folk of today, the popular demonstration, the popular sovereignty, the 100,000 people who gathered in Edinburgh two years ago to demonstrate for Scottish independence. Now, that is a very reasonable point to make, that the issue here is going to be decided by popular sovereignty, by the people, by the ordinary people, the small folk of Scotland, not the politicians, not you, not me, the people, if they want independence. I thought it was beautifully made. It's now up to, I think, 350,000 viewers on the social media.
Well, we've probably added a few more to it for you.
Great.
But listen,
thank you for playing it, Iain.
What you are, though, what you're portraying yourself as is Scotland's answer to UKIP. You are the Scottish Nigel Farage. You're trying to outflank the SNP on nationalism. It's fairly desperate.
Well, okay, then, you and I had some robust discussions, but nothing like the discussions I used to have with Nigel Farage. I don't think we agree on anything. Alba is a social democratic party looking for economic progress and social equality with environmental responsibility. We're the very opposite of UKIP. We're also a party that does have a keen sense of Scottish history, Scottish culture, and we're a party who sees the urgency of national independence. The noblest cause in politics, to seek the independence of your country. That's nothing to do with Nigel Farage. Nigel Farage was seeking to take Britain out of the cooperation with other countries in Europe, which has turned out...
You're trying to take Scotland out of the union with England. I think the parallel is obvious.
No, we've discussed this many times. See, I think
not for a long time.
I think it's possible to be independent within an association of nations like the European Union. I think you can be an independent country within an association. You took a different view, as did Nigel Farage. I might say, on these aspects, you had much more in common with Nigel Farage than I did. Other people don't think you can do that, but I think you can. So I seek an independent Scotland as a European nation, which will seek cooperation in one way or another with other European nations.
So does the SNP. This is what I think a lot of people, particularly your former colleagues, don't understand. Pete Wishart commented on that video. He says, geez, we're trying to win our independence through presenting ourselves as a progressive, modern and outward-looking nation, but let's take up the rusty claymores and shout freedom. Embarrassing.
Yes. Well, the only thing embarrassing is that Pete Wishart used to, at one time, play for a Gaelic band called Runrig. He seems to have departed from his previous associations with Scottish culture. Look, I did say, and I'm not going to get drawn into the SNP, because my attitude to politics and to this campaign is stay on the positive. People only attack you like that when they've got something to worry about. And of course, the SNP know there is an irresistible argument for voting for Alba, which is that the SNP, because of its success in the constituency ballot, gets next to nothing in the list. 1 million votes the SNP got in the list last election in 2016. They got a grand total of 4 ballots, 4 seats on the regional list. If Alba gets half that number, we'll elect all 32 of our candidates, 18 women and 14 men.
See, I think you have learned from the Farage and Trump playbook, and you're trying to emulate some of the tactics, because they were very electorally, in terms of the referendum, Farage was very successful, and I think you've looked at some of the populist moves and you thought, well, okay, we'll copy a few of those.
Okay, right, Iain. I mean, fair dues. I was reasonably successful as the SNP leader over 20 years. I mean, when I became SNP leader, I think we had 4 MPs at Westminster. When I left the SNP leadership eventually, we were the dominant force in Scottish politics. So, I don't really need anybody else's playbook. I just happen to think, as do many other people, that we should be injecting a sense of urgency into the independence debate. I think a lot of people in Scotland mean it when we say Scotland wants to be independent. We want to be independent, not in the hereafter, but in the here and now. And if Alba can offer that perspective in an entirely reasonable, positive way, that is an addition to the election campaign. One more thing, I learned a lesson, this, and maybe too late actually, in the Scottish referendum of 2014. I mean, I'd spent 20 years as SNP leader. I'd been all my life in the SNP. Obviously, to me, Scottish nationalism became embodied by the Scottish National Party. But actually, the support for independence, as opposed to dominating the Scottish landscape as the SNP, only took off in the high summer of 2014 when it became a broad-based yes campaign, not based on one party, but based on a variety of points of view. And if I was to compare Alba to anything, I would say it's the political embodiment of that broad-based yes campaign from the high summer of 2014, and it's a thoroughly positive and good thing.
Okay, You and I had a little bit of a falling out when you decided to do a programme on RT Russia Today. I must admit, a little bit of me died when I heard you were doing that, because I thought I couldn't understand how someone with your reputation could just literally ruin it overnight by giving credibility to a channel which is a Russian propaganda channel. I'm not saying your programmes are a Russian propaganda outlet. I understand they're independently produced and all the rest of it, but you are giving that channel credibility just by appearing on it.
Well, see, this is where our disagreement lies. If you were able to look me in the face and say, hey, you work for RT and your programmes are directed in some sort of propaganda, you would have a point. But you and I both know that's not the case.
But the channel generally is like that.
Yeah, but let's talk about the programme. The programme is independently produced. I can honestly say in 3 years, I've never even had a whisper from RT what should and shouldn't let. When I interviewed Peter Tatchell, for example, about gay rights in Russia during the World Cup, nobody in RT lifted the phone and says you shouldn't have interviewed him. We get to do what we like, when we like, how we like. Nobody gives us a recommendation.
I'm not arguing with that.
And they broadcast
you are just a tame little puppy dog, because you give them credibility by the fact that your name is associated with the channel.
Unfortunately, I take the view that, look, if the show originally was meant to be on ITV, I don't know if you know that, but their condition of putting it on was in a trial run, was that I went into the jungle, which I declined to do. It's absolutely true.
I would love to have seen that.
You might have loved to see it, but you want to talk about credibility, I think that would have been the end. But therefore, if a channel is willing to broadcast on the basis it's an independently produced show, we do what we like, we say what we like, then, and within the terms, of course, of Ofcom rules, as you and I both have to adhere to, and then I think that's fair enough, and therefore we do it.
Let's just test this out. The poisonings in Salisbury, you seem rather reluctant to blame Russia for being behind those.
Only in the BBC.
99% of the UK population knows that to be the case. Why is that?
Well, the interview you're referring to was because I rather objected in the Scottish election campaign being told by the BBC that I should actually be talking about Russian international politics. The objection wasn't to talking about Salisbury and Russia. The objection was doing it in the BBC, where people are directed. And we're talking about freedom of broadcasting. There's precious little freedom of broadcasting, in my opinion, in the BBC. So my stance with the BBC is I don't think I would sit there and be directed by them.
I'm not interested in your stance with the BBC. No, I'm interested in your views on the poisonings.
I absolutely agree. I mean, look, I don't think that two GRU or GU agents, as it would be now, were in Salisbury to measure the tower length.
Do you think
Salisbury.
Putin ordered those assassinations?
Well, I think that's more difficult to establish, and I don't think that has been
do you think the Russian state was behind it?
I think there was Russian involvement in the issue, and I also know...
Do you think the Russian state was behind it?
I don't know, but I know that the OPCW...
Do you suspect?
I know that OPCW put... Novichok substances into their banned list in November 2019. I think they were right to do so, and I think it's important that people adhere to the international standards in these matters.
Do you think that the Russian state was behind it?
I don't know, Ian. What I do know is that there was...
But all of there is enough evidence for you to say yes to that question. No, and the fact that you don't, I think, leads people to think...
Absolute nonsense. I don't agree with your proposition. What I agree with, and what I'm happily prepared to say, is I do not believe that two people associated with the GRU were in Salisbury because they wanted to pay a visit to Salisbury Cathedral. I didn't think that was a particularly convincing story. I also agree that the international evidence established that Novichok should be added to the list of banned substances. I think that was a thoroughly good thing.
What do you think 85,000 Russian troops are doing on the border of Ukraine?
Well, I think there's a substantial international dispute between Russia and Ukraine, and I'm delighted that unlike President Trump, President Biden last night said he was looking for a secure and stable relationship with Russia. I think if an adult has come back into the room in the White House and we see some positive and progressive American diplomacy, I think the world will be a better place.
But what do you think 85,000 troops are doing on the border?
I think there's a military confrontation between Russia and Ukraine at the present moment, and I think it would be to everybody's benefit if there's a new relationship in international politics. Hence my support for President Biden's remarks of last night.
So you don't think that they're there to invade Ukraine? I mean, that's what it looks like, doesn't it?
I'll tell you what I do think. I think if you and I and every other commentator, it takes the presidential remarks of last night as an indication we're going to have some proper progressive diplomacy to try and resolve international disputes in a peaceful way, then the world and you and I would be living in a happier place.
Do you think Putin was behind the poisoning of Alexei Navalny?
I think Mr. Navalny, if I was directing Russian politics, should be let out of prison and he should be allowed to contest elections in Russia to see the level of his support. That would be my argument.
But do you think that the Russian state was behind that?
I don't know, Ian, and you don't know either. And I'm delighted to talk with you about Russian politics because you talk to me about all sorts of things. But, you know...
But you see, the thing is, that I've asked you three questions now regarding Russia and Putin, and you've given me, at best, evasive answers on all three.
Well, I don't get evasive answers at all. I think I've said, you asked me a question, Mr. Navalny, I said he should be out of prison, he should be contesting elections. I have been able and willing and have done criticisms of Russia as I've criticised America and the United Kingdom. What I won't see, and I don't accept, Ian, is that proper interviews and questioning should be used as a blanket in the case of the BBC for what is no more than state-sponsored Russia-phobia.
Final question
I'm not
on
getting
this.
any time for it.
If you're part of the Scottish government, which is possible, there might be some sort of coalition arrangement.
It have to be against my wishes.
Indulge me. But who would you like to be closer to, Biden or Putin?
I think President Biden... Well, two things. One is that President Putin, according to reports, was asked by David Cameron to intervene on the no side of the Scottish referendum. That's widely reported at the time, and it was reported he said no. That President Obama was asked, and did of course intervene in the no campaign, or in support of the no campaign in the Scottish referendum. I heard President Biden being asked a question about Ireland, and he described himself as a friend of Ireland and the Irish state. I'm nourishing hopes that President Biden may be as much a friend of Scotland as he is of Ireland.
So is your answer Biden rather than Putin?
Well, look, I'll tell you what I think. I think that neither.
It's quite simple. It's what you can answer the question with one word: Biden or Putin.
No, I think that neither President Putin nor President Biden, if you're asking me to be serious, should intervene in the Scottish constitutional debate. I think President Biden has certain aspects which make him a much better president than President Trump.
An evasive answer.
Well, it wasn't an evasive answer at all.
Aren't you?
Why was that an evasive answer?
Well, because I asked Biden or Putin, and you didn't seem to. Most British politicians would have immediately said Biden, but you haven't.
Iain Dale or another LBC presenter, Nick Ferrari. I mean, come on, let's ask serious
Nick Ferrari
questions.
Got to do with the price of fish?
Well, do I prefer Iain Dale or Nick Ferrari?
Well, we all know the answer to that question.
No, we don't. You don't know the answer to that question either. It's a silly question.
I did. A bit of me has died.
You prefer Alex Salmond or Nicholas Sturgeon?
Aren't you cynically using women to deflect from your own record and reputation on women's issues? You used predominantly female candidates at your launch. Only 2 weeks after the launch, you held a women's conference. You've used the trans rights issue to promote women-only safe spaces, which I think a lot of people would say is deeply ironic, coming from somebody who some women don't feel safe around and who's admitted to behaving inappropriately.
But unfortunately for you, a jury found not guilty and innocent of all charges.
No, but you have admitted yourself you've behaved inappropriately.
Our defence was that the allegations against me were part fabrication and part exaggeration, and I'm not going to rerun the trial with you.
No, I'm not asking.
Nor should you do so.
I'm not asking you to. But when you have one of your candidates accusing Scottish LGBT organisations of wanting to lower the age of consent,
but that's not true. You see.
Well, it is true because I've read the comments.
No, you can't possibly have read.
I have.
No, well, I'm sorry, Iain, you cannot. It was a closed space conference. Nobody has read these comments. What they read was a tweet from someone else who said they'd read the comments. That tweet has been deleted. That's just a fact, Iain. Margaret Lynch, let me tell you something about Margaret Lynch. I've known her for 40 years. Through the Scottish Labour Party, the Labour Party, through a range of charities in Scotland. She'd been one of the strongest feminist voices in Scottish politics for that length of time. The idea that Margaret Lynch has a semblance of being anti-gay in any bone in her body is totally ridiculous, and you who don't know her shouldn't make that suggestion on this or any other programme. She's a fine candidate for the Alba Party.
Different LGBT organisations have reacted very angrily to this suggestion.
And they didn't see her comments either, I'm afraid.
Well, they've been widely reported, not just by one person.
No, I beg your pardon. Her comments have been reported by no journalist, because no journalist in Scotland has seen these comments, because it was a closed, safe space conference. What journalism in Scotland has done is taken a tweet from someone else ascribing comments to Margaret Lynch, which were not the comments, and despite the fact that's been said,
do you take the wider point, though, that you do have a problem with women voters?
Well, the trouble, your wider point, is it just collapsed on an examination of the evidence. I take the point that there are 18 women, some of the strongest feminist voices in Scotland, in the Alba Party, and I'm proud to have them in our range of candidates. I also happen to believe that the Women and Equalities paper that was passed by that conference, which is one of the first policies of the Alba Party, is a valuable addition to the Scottish political debate. I think that many people in Scotland have a great difficulty with the proposals for self-identification, and I think the voices of women deserve and merit being heard, and I think the proposal to take it to what's called a citizens' assembly, where these things can be discussed in a sensible, progressive manner, as opposed to banter on the internet, which you and I both know is the most destructive way for political discourse, is an excellent proposal that deserves serious consideration by somebody like yourself. Now, I'll just show you how bad this is. There is a Scottish journalist called Jerry Hassan, right? His name's not important for any reason. Today he accused the Alba Party of homophobia, looking at a picture of 4 Alba Party candidates. 2 out of these 4 are openly gay. Either an MP and an MSP has been an MSP and trying to be it. Now, if somebody has got the temerity to accuse people who are openly gay, have campaigned on that basis for election, some journalist, presumably because he didn't know. So that is how bad we have come to in terms of contemporary reporting in Scottish politics.
I can take that. And you are quite right to say you were cleared of the charges that were laid against you.
That's kind of important.
In the court. It is, of course. I understand that's important.
It's called a jury.
I understand that's important. But when you yourself have admitted inappropriate behaviour in the past, your own barrister in an overheard conversation on a train made some fairly sort of right comments about you, that you can understand why some people are a little bit dubious about your record with women.
Right. Well, clearly some of the strongest feminist voices in Scottish politics are not, otherwise they wouldn't be Alba Party candidates. And I think that's an indication of how seriously Alba takes the issue. The fact that a jury decided it's not something you can just brush across here, and that's something that is decided. And the BBC's been trying to retry me for the last year. It's not going to work for them. It won't work for anybody else.
We've gone way over the time.
And last time I'm going to make the point. The people will judge these matters. Otherwise, I wouldn't be putting my file forward for the election.
And I understand that. But could you bring yourself to say, right here, right now, I recognise that I have behaved inappropriately in the past, and I would like to apologise to anyone that has happened to?
Well, Iain, if you understand the case,
I do. I followed it closely because I've known you for a number of years.
And you're kind enough to send me a very kind message when the jury acquitted me of all charges. I should recognise that. But then you would know that an apology was made, not for what I was accused of, because the jury disposed of that, but an apology was made in 2013. The difficulty is...
Would you like to repeat that now? Because I think a lot of people have forgotten that.
No, because, well, they may have forgotten it, but I've just told them again, and I repeated that apology last year. See, the trouble is with the culture we're in now, Iain, that if you apologise, then that's regarded as an admission of guilt. And you and I are both aware that's two different things entirely. So what you get is a pile-on. He has apologised, he is this, he is that. Instead of saying, well, look, this went to trial in the highest civil court in Scotland and the highest criminal court in Scotland. A predominantly female jury decided the issue in front of a lady judge. That should be that, and now it's time to move on. And I'm moving on to putting myself before the people with the Alba Party in 3 weeks' time.
Well, I hope we can speak to you again after May the 6th and see what happens in that election. It's going to be fascinating to watch.
And congratulations to LBC, if I'm allowed to say so, for doing leadership interviews, unlike some other broadcasting organisations, which I won't mention, but could be decided as either public service or state broadcasters, depending on your point of view, and giving a fair crack of the whip to a new political party and a new political force.
Well, we're giving a fair crack of the whip to everyone. Thank you very much,
Great
Alex.
pleasure, Iain. Thank you.